We started The Thinking Believer about 3 years ago, and our eyes were bigger than our schedules. We made a video a week for a little bit more than a month, and then burned out pretty spectacularly. Then, in just the last year, especially in the middle of 2021, the conviction began to take root in me that this wasn't done yet. I started reflecting on what worked from that first go-around and what I wanted to do differently with a reboot, so to speak. When starting the first videos, man, there are so many variables that went into it. Like, I had not really ever been the person in front of the camera before. There were graphic design decisions and all of those kinds of things. And in the months that I've taken to reflect on this, I feel like I have at least a little bit of a vision for where we're going next. But anyhow, one of the things that I've been reflecting on in these last couple months is just the name, The Thinking Believer. Strangely enough, I don't actually remember anything about the process for choosing a name. The Thinking Believer kind of just spontaneously came into existence at some point over the process that first time through. But I've been spending some time reflecting on why that name always felt so right. It seems to me that at some point we as Christians started believing that the mind doesn't play an important role in our faith. Sometimes that takes on hostility towards rational conversation about faith or a distrust of science. But man, in my experience, far more often, it seems like the modern Western church just shows an indifference for thought and even for Christian thought. You can see that in just how little we know about our faith. Speaking for myself, I grew up in the church, but before college, I would have been able to tell you virtually nothing about church history between the end of Acts and me sitting in a pew on Sunday. And honestly, it wasn't just Christian history after the Bible ends. I was woefully Bible illiterate. I had a lot of bits and pieces of Christian doctrine, but if you had given me the stories of the Bible and asked me to put them in chronological order, I would not have even gotten close. When I was wrestling with the problem of evil in college, I had no idea that Christian thinkers had been confronting this same question for almost 2,000 years, pretty much for as long as Christianity existed. It felt like I was the first person ever who had realized there was a problem. Even beyond what we know about our Christian faith and legacy, when was the last time you heard a sermon on the importance of Christian thought or the role of the mind in the Christian faith? If I'd been asked to make a list of 100 most important aspects of being a Christian, thought or mind would not have even occurred to me. And I'm guessing that if I asked you to make a list of the top 100 things that were most important to a Christian faith, you would be in the same boat. And yet, when Jesus is asked what is the most important commandment, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. It's my conviction that we're not taking that seriously enough, and that is having a huge and terrible impact on God's church and his people. That verse where Jesus calls us to use our minds isn't a fluke either. In Acts 17, 2-4, it says Paul went into the synagogue on the 3 Sabbath days, and he reasoned with them from scriptures. In 1 Peter 1:13, Peter tells his readers to prepare their minds for action. Looking into the Old Testament, Isaiah 1:18, the Lord says, "Come, let us reason together." Thought and using our mind to reason through things is not only not opposed to Christian faith, it's something that's a critical piece of it from beginning to end. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." I think this is the huge thing that we're missing as Christians by not spending enough time talking about the mind and using the mind. There's an assumption that the only need we have for our minds as Christians is if we find ourselves in a debate with people who don't share our beliefs. But no, when Jesus is answering the question, what is the greatest commandment, he doesn't say, train your mind so you can make compelling arguments. He says, love the Lord with all your mind. That wouldn't change if you were the last person alive. In Romans 12, Paul is saying God transforms us through our minds, through thought. God renews our minds, and our minds in turn transform our lives. I am convinced this is a process that's happening whether or not you're aware of it. But just because we're doing this already doesn't mean it's something that doesn't need cultivation. And not to beat a dead horse, but Jesus says this is the most important instruction. The rest of the Bible has this expectation for transformation too. Jesus says, look at the birds of the air who don't plant or harvest crops, and yet God provides for them. You know you're more important to God than birds, therefore do not be anxious. It's a logical argument for peace. And man, that is an example that I have come back to constantly in the past year through all the uncertainty of COVID and lockdowns and health, reminding myself, bringing that thought process to mind that God is in control. That has transformed my response, sometimes really effectively, sometimes minimally effectively, but still. A couple more examples of these logical cases that are made throughout the Bible. When asked if we should pay taxes, Jesus asks, whose image is on the coin? And he says, therefore, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. He says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers. The Great Commission says, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Acts 3 says, therefore, repent and turn back, that your sins may be blotted out. Every time scriptures say, therefore, they're making a rational argument that because of this thing I just told you, therefore, you should think and act in this way. That's just 5 examples. In the English Standard Version translation of the Bible, the word therefore is used 584 times. The Bible is making arguments from reason and logic constantly. I don't think we all have to go get a PhD in the Bible in order to grow in our faith. But on the other hand, something that I became convicted of when I was in college was the question of how much do I know about God and Christianity and the Bible compared to other things. This will say a lot about me as a person, but I remember asking myself, how many books could I fill with my knowledge of God compared to how many books could I fill with my knowledge of Star Wars? With Star Wars, I could have told you the fictional names of planets, names of spaceships, backstories of characters from the movies who never even have lines, how the movies were made, the ways the movies changed the movie-making industry, the way the movies changed the special effects industry, the way they changed merchandising. I could have filled volumes with that knowledge. That was not the case for my knowledge of God. And I had to ask myself, if I really believed that there was a God who created everything and wanted to know and be known by us, then how did it make any sense for me that I was putting more energy into learning about a fictional galaxy far, far away than I was into learning more about him? Which, if you'll notice, was me being transformed by the renewing of my mind. God was working in me through a rational thought process that said, if I believe that God is real and important, then the only logical thing for me to do is to learn more about him. It's also impossible to overstate how thoroughly that thought, that renewing of my mind in this one area, has transformed my faith and my life over the past 15 years. The question is this: do you take Jesus seriously when he says that we should love God with all of our minds? Are you conforming to the world, or are you actively engaging in the transformation through the renewing of your mind? I did say that I think this is something that can happen unintentionally as we follow Christ, that we can't help but use our minds. But in Romans, Paul is giving this as an imperative. It's an instruction. He's not saying, FYI, as you seek God, your mind will be renewed and lives transformed. He says, don't conform, be transformed. It's something that we should take an active role in. This channel is called The Thinking Believer because I take Jesus seriously when he says that we should love God with all our minds. I'm not a scholar or a genius. I'm just a guy who takes that calling seriously and is trying my best to live that out the best I can. I'd love for you to join me. I can't say for sure how often we'll be posting or what those videos will look like, but the current plan is to be talking through things like church history, the history of the Bible, looking at what scholars are saying, and then also engaging with some of the issues of the day from a thoughtful Christian perspective. And through it all, trying to speak the truth in love. Like and subscribe if that sounds like something you'd like to be part of. I can't promise that I'll always be right, but I can promise that I will do my best to speak the truth in love. I trust that you'll be using your own mind to help us grow closer to God together.